The galaxy had never known peace under the Xylothians. Once, countless planets thrived, each with its own culture, its own life, and its own rhythm. Now only ruins remained. The galaxy was reduced to a wasteland of broken worlds and shattered civilizations, all under the boot of an unstoppable oppressor. The Xylothians did not simply conquer, they obliterated. Planets that once sang with the hum of life now echoed only with silence and despair. Every star system within their grasp bore the scars of their conquest, and no one was spared. The Xylothians themselves were terrifying to behold. Towering over most other species, their metallic exoskeletons shimmered like cold steel, their violet eyes glowing with an eerie calmness that sent shivers down the spine of anyone who dared to meet their gaze. They weren't just conquerors, they were a force of nature, methodical in their destruction and merciless in their rule. It wasn't just their advanced technology that kept the galaxy in check, it was the sheer, unyielding dominance of their society. Their empire was built on hierarchy and fear. Only the strongest and most ruthless rose to power in their ranks, while the weak were either enslaved or discarded. To them, other species were nothing more than tools, useful for labor or experimentation, but ultimately disposable. The Xylothians enslaved millions, forcing entire races into backbreaking labor in mines and factories. The Grovians, once a peaceful species known for their craftsmanship, were now reduced to nothing more than miners, digging up toxic materials from the cores of dying planets, their health and spirits destroyed by years of servitude. They were but one example of the Xylothian cruelty. Rebellion, though rare, was always met with swift and brutal retaliation. The Threll, once proud warriors with a rich history of combat and honor, had dared to rise up against their Xylothian masters. They believed their skill in battle could win them freedom. They were wrong. The Xylothians decimated them with terrifying efficiency, scattering their forces across the galaxy. Those who survived the massacre were hunted down, their warrior culture reduced to whispers in the wind. The Threll were no longer a force to be reckoned with. They had become a cautionary tale, a reminder of the futility of resistance. And then there were the Valorians, intellectual beings with vast knowledge of science and technology. The Xylothians saw their potential, but not as partners or equals. They exploited the Valorians, extracting every bit of knowledge they could. Valorian scientists were forced to work on Xylothian projects, creating weapons and devices that only further solidified the Empire's control. Those who refused were swiftly executed, their vast libraries of knowledge burned to the ground. Across the galaxy, entire planets were wiped from existence, their populations erased as warnings to others. The Xylothians didn't just want control, they wanted absolute submission. And submission they received through fear, destruction, and the crushing weight of their dominance. There was no hope, no future for anyone under their rule. For generations, the galaxy lived in terror, unsure if they would survive the next wave of Xylothian wrath. But in the midst of this overwhelming despair, a whisper began to spread. Legends spoke of an ancient species, one that had once faced impossible odds and triumphed. The humans. These stories were passed down in hushed tones, often dismissed as mere myth or fantasy. Some said they were unbeatable, that their resilience and ingenuity had no equal in the galaxy. Others scoffed at the idea, claiming the humans were long extinct, if they had ever existed at all. After all, no one had seen a human in millennia. Their name was barely a memory, a faint echo of a time long forgotten. Yet, despite the uncertainty, the stories persisted. In the darkest corners of the galaxy, in the hidden enclaves where the last of the free species gathered, the tales of humanity offered a glimmer of hope. Could they be real? Could the humans still exist somewhere out there, waiting for the right moment to return? It was a dangerous hope, one that many feared to entertain. But in a galaxy oppressed by the Xylothians, even the faintest sliver of hope was enough to keep some fighting. Still, the galaxy remained under the Xylothians' iron grip, and the legends of humanity were nothing more than stories. For now, the Xylothians continued their reign of terror, crushing any who dared defy them. Entire worlds lived and died in fear, knowing that at any moment, their turn could come. The Xylothians' control was absolute. At least, That's what everyone believed. Until something, somewhere, began to stir. The galaxy had no idea what was coming. And neither did the Xylothians. The Grelvians were not known for boldness. Their peaceful nature had always led them to avoid conflict, preferring to remain hidden from the Xylothians' watchful eyes. But desperation had a way of driving even the most cautious species into unfamiliar territory. On the edge of the galaxy, far from the reach of Xylothian patrols, a small Grelvian scouting vessel detected an anomalous signal. It was faint, old, and came from a sector long abandoned. Despite their better judgment, curiosity took hold. There was a small hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find something, resources, technology, or perhaps even an ally. The journey to the source of the signal was fraught with unease. The sector was desolate, a graveyard of forgotten systems. When they arrived, the Grelvians could barely believe what they saw. Before them floated a colossal spacecraft, unlike anything they had ever seen. It was ancient, its dark hull battered by time and space, yet it remained remarkably intact. The ship seemed to drift in an eternal slumber, as if waiting for something, or someone, to awaken it. The Grelvian crew hesitated. They were no explorers by nature, but something about this ship drew them in. The design was unfamiliar, the symbols etched into the hull indecipherable, yet there was an air of power about the vessel. After some debate, they decided to board the ship. Fear lingered in the back of their minds, but the prospect of discovery, and perhaps salvation, outweighed their apprehension. As the boarding party entered the ship, they were greeted by an eerie silence. The corridors stretched endlessly, illuminated only by the occasional flicker of ancient lights. Dust hung in the air, undisturbed for centuries. The deeper they went, the more they realized the ship was not as abandoned as they had thought. Strange devices lined the walls, dormant but clearly of advanced design. The technology was far beyond anything the Grelvians had ever encountered, even more sophisticated than that of the Xylothians. After hours of exploration, they came upon something unexpected, rows upon rows of cryopods, each containing a figure inside. At first, the Grelvians couldn't comprehend what they were looking at. The beings within the pods looked almost human. But that couldn't be possible. Humans were a myth, an ancient race said to have vanished long ago. No one in the galaxy had seen one in millennia. Yet here they were, preserved in stasis, asleep for who knows how long. Shock gave way to awe as they examined the pods. The humans, or what they assumed were humans, looked peaceful, untouched by time. The Grelvians couldn't help but wonder how this ship had come to be here, adrift for centuries. A search of the ship's logs revealed that it had been on a deep space mission before suffering a catastrophic failure. The crew had entered cryo sleep, hoping to be rescued. But no rescue had ever come. They had drifted, forgotten, through the void. Now, the Grelvians faced a dilemma. The humans were clearly not dead, but whether they should be awakened was another question entirely. On one hand, the humans could be powerful allies. The legends spoke of their resilience, their unmatched ability to adapt and overcome impossible odds. If even a fraction of those stories were true, the humans could be the key to turning the tide against the Xylothians. But on the other hand, there was risk. What if the humans were hostile? What if waking them brought more danger than hope? And perhaps most frightening of all, what if the Xylothians discovered the Grelvians had made contact with the humans? The consequences could be catastrophic. The Grelvian crew debated the pros and cons. Some argued that they had no choice. The galaxy was dying, and any chance of survival, no matter how slim, was worth the risk. Others feared the unknown, unsure if they could handle whatever might emerge from those pods. But ultimately, the decision came down to a simple truth: they could not continue as they were. The Xylothians would eventually find them, and when that happened, the Grelvians would be crushed just like every other species that had dared to resist. They needed help, and the humans might be their only chance. With that, the Grelvians made their choice. They would awaken a few of the humans, enough to determine if they could be trusted, but not so many that they couldn't contain the situation if it went wrong. Carefully, they began the process of reviving the first pod. The technology was ancient but still functional. The Grelvians worked with a mixture of fear and excitement, knowing that what they were about to do could change the course of history. As the first humans stirred from cryo sleep, the tension in the air was palpable. The Grelvians watched in silence as the pod's occupants slowly opened their eyes, blinking against the harsh light of the ship's interior. The human, a woman, looked disoriented at first, her movements sluggish as her body adjusted to being awake after centuries of stasis. But within moments she was alert, her gaze sharp as she took in her surroundings. The Grelvians stepped forward, cautiously introducing themselves. They expected confusion, maybe even fear. But the human woman, after a brief moment of adjustment, responded with remarkable composure. Her voice was steady, her questions clear and direct. She asked about the ship, about how long they had been asleep, about the state of the galaxy. The Grelvians explained everything they knew, from the rise of the Xylothians to the current state of the galaxy under their rule. The human listened carefully, absorbing the information with a calm that surprised the Grelvians. When they finished, she introduced herself as Captain Maya Rodriguez, commander of the ship. Her calm demeanor gave the Grelvians a sense of hope they hadn't felt in a long time. Perhaps the stories were true after all. Perhaps the humans were as formidable as the legends claimed. With Captain Rodriguez awake, the Grelvians began to feel cautiously optimistic. But they knew that awakening more humans would be a gamble. They had taken the first step, but the road ahead was uncertain. Captain Maya Rodriguez's awakening had been just the beginning. Her initial confusion quickly gave way to sharp clarity as she grasped the gravity of the situation. Though the Grelvians were hesitant, they provided her with a universal translator, allowing her to communicate effectively. The moment her words could be understood, her commanding presence became undeniable. She wasted no time asking about the state of the galaxy, wanting to know every detail about the Xylothians, their rule, and the suffering endured by the countless species under their control. The Grelvians explained everything. They described the centuries of oppression, the destruction of entire planets, and the complete subjugation of the galaxy's inhabitants. Rodriguez listened in silence, her expression unreadable. It was only when they finished that she spoke again, this time with a steady resolve. She requested to awaken her key crew members, recognizing that this was not a battle she could fight alone. The Grelvians, despite their fears, agreed. They knew they had no choice. The Xylothians' grip was tightening, and they needed every advantage they could get. Dr. Alan Kim was the next to awaken. He was a brilliant engineer, known for his ability to solve complex problems with minimal resources. When he heard about the Xylothians, his response was immediate. They needed to assess the ship's condition and find out what they could salvage. The Grelvian technology was impressive, but it was clear that even their best tools were primitive compared to what humans had once possessed. To Kim, this ship was an untapped treasure trove of possibilities, and he intended to unlock its full potential. Lieutenant Sarah ONeal followed shortly after. A tactical expert with years of combat experience, ONeal's focus was on strategy. Upon learning about the scattered and disorganized resistance efforts across the galaxy, she immediately began forming a plan. The key, she explained, was not to engage the Xylothians head-on, but to hit them where they least expected. Guerrilla tactics, sabotage, and misdirection would be their greatest weapons. The humans couldn't match the Xylothians in numbers or technology, but they could outthink and outmaneuver them. As the humans worked alongside the Grelvians, a bond began to form. Trust didn't come easily at first. The Grelvians, still fearful of what might come, watched the humans closely. But the more they interacted, the more the Grelvians realized how different humans were from the Xylothians. Where the Xylothians ruled through fear, the humans inspired cooperation. They shared their knowledge freely, teaching the Grelvians techniques and strategies that were revolutionary by their standards, but outdated by human measures. Kim, in particular, found common ground with the Grelvian engineers. He introduced them to technologies they could never have imagined, methods of energy conversion, advanced propulsion systems, and innovative approaches to repairing the ancient ship they had found. The Grelvians were amazed at the humans' ability to make the most out of limited resources. What the humans considered obsolete was a breakthrough to the Grelvians. They marveled at the humans' problem-solving abilities, their creativity, and most of all, their adaptability. It wasn't just about the technology, though. It was the mindset. Humans looked at problems differently. Where the Grelvians saw barriers, the humans saw opportunities. ONeal, meanwhile, focused on organizing the scattered pockets of resistance across the galaxy. Through Grelvian communication networks, she reached out to leaders of oppressed species, proposing a unified front against the Xylothians. At first, many were skeptical. For generations, the Xylothians had been unbeatable. Resistance efforts had been crushed without mercy. What could a few humans, long thought extinct, possibly do? But the humans didn't just offer words. They showed results. Small operations were launched, carefully orchestrated by ONeal and her team. A supply convoy here, a communications outpost there. Each strike was precise, each one weakening the Xylothians in subtle but significant ways. The humans never attacked directly, never faced the Xylothians in open combat. Instead, they targeted their infrastructure, disrupting supply lines, creating confusion, and sowing distrust within their ranks. It wasn't long before the other species began to take notice. What surprised the Grelvians most was how quickly the humans adapted to their surroundings. They learned about the different species, their cultures, and their strengths. This wasn't just about human survival. It was about forming alliances, uniting the galaxy's disparate populations under a common cause. And the more the other species saw of the humans, the more they believed. The legends about humans had spoken of their ingenuity and resilience, but seeing it firsthand was something else entirely. Despite the odds, despite centuries of Xylothian dominance, hope began to spread. The Grelvians, once too afraid to even dream of rebellion, found themselves believing that change was possible. They weren't the only ones. Across the galaxy, the oppressed species began to rally. The humans had given them something they hadn't felt in generations, a reason to fight. Captain Rodriguez knew they were far from victory. The Xylothians were powerful, and it would take more than a few small victories to bring them down. But she also knew that this was just the beginning. The galaxy had been asleep for far too long, under the boot of tyranny. Now, with the humans leading the charge, it was time to wake up. The resistance was no longer a scattered dream. It was becoming a reality, and the Xylothians were about to face something they had never expected, a united galaxy, ready to fight back. The humans had proven their worth, not through brute force, but through strategy, adaptability, and the alliances they forged. It wasn't just about the technology they shared or the tactics they taught. It was about their ability to inspire those around them, to make others believe that freedom was not just a distant memory but a future they could all fight for. The resistance had grown beyond anything the Xylothians could have anticipated. What had started as small, isolated acts of defiance had transformed into a galaxy-wide rebellion, fueled by hope and the ingenuity of the humans. Representatives from dozens of species met in secret, their hearts heavy with the weight of centuries of oppression, but their spirits lifted by the possibility of liberation. At the center of it all were the humans, who, after centuries in cryo sleep, had returned to the galaxy not as conquerors, but as liberators. In the shadow of distant planets, away from the eyes of the Xylothians, the humans laid out their plan. It wasn't just about brute force or direct conflict. The Xylothians were too powerful for that. Instead, it would be a war of disruption, of precision strikes designed to dismantle their control piece by piece. Humans had always thrived in adversity, and this situation was no different. They established training programs, teaching their allies the art of guerrilla warfare, sabotage, and the importance of unity. Operation Silent Dawn was the first major step. Using human hacking techniques, they infiltrated the Xylothian communication networks. These networks had always been a cornerstone of the Xylothian Empire, allowing them to coordinate their forces across vast distances in real time. But the humans knew how to exploit the smallest weaknesses. What began as minor disruptions soon escalated into complete chaos. Commands were misrouted, false orders issued, and supply chains thrown into disarray. The Xylothians, accustomed to complete control, were caught off guard. Their forces found themselves scattered and isolated, unable to communicate effectively, leaving them vulnerable to the Resistance's next moves. The Battle of Nebula Ridge marked a turning point. Under Lieutenant ONeal's direction, the humans led a surprise attack against a critical Xylothian outpost. It wasn't a large force, but it was enough to cripple the Xylothian supply lines in the sector. The victory was swift and decisive, a shock to the Xylothians, who had never believed the scattered resistance could pose a serious threat. Morale among the oppressed species soared. It was the first major victory in what had once seemed like an unwinnable war. News of the battle spread quickly, with the humans broadcasting messages of hope and defiance across the galaxy. Liberation broadcasts reached every corner of the galaxy, igniting a fire of rebellion that the Xylothians had no way of extinguishing. As the resistance grew stronger, the Xylothians were forced to confront a reality they had never imagined. They were losing control. They tried to fight back, sending fleets to crush the resistance, but their efforts were increasingly futile. The humans and their allies struck where the Xylothians were weakest, never engaging directly unless they had a clear advantage. The Xylothian Empire, once thought invincible, began to crumble from within. The final confrontation came sooner than anyone had anticipated. Captain Rodriguez, along with her most trusted allies, led a strike force deep into the heart of the Xylothian Empire, aiming for their central command. It was a bold move, but one they knew could end the war once and for all. The Xylothians, desperate and unprepared for such a direct assault, scrambled to defend themselves. Yet, despite their superior technology and overwhelming numbers, they found themselves outmatched. The humans fought with a level of determination and resourcefulness that the Xylothians had never encountered. At the center of the conflict was Captain Rodriguez herself, standing face to face with Supreme Warlord Xorn. The battle wasn't one of physical strength, but of wits and will. Xorn, cold and calculating, had ruled through fear his entire life. But Rodriguez embodied something he couldn't understand: resilience. She wasn't intimidated by his power or his threats. Instead, she used his arrogance against him, exploiting his belief in the Xylothians' superiority. The confrontation ended not with violence, but with Rodriguez outmaneuvering Xorn, breaking his control over the remaining Xylothian forces. With Xorn's defeat, the Xylothian Empire collapsed almost overnight. Their centralized power structure, built on fear and absolute control, couldn't survive without its leader. Across the galaxy, planets once under their rule began to rise up, overthrowing their oppressors. Celebrations erupted on liberated worlds as news of the Xylothians' downfall spread like wildfire. The galaxy was free, for the first time in centuries. Yet, in the midst of the celebrations, the humans were faced with an unexpected offer. Many of the newly freed species looked to them for leadership, seeing them as the natural rulers of this new galaxy. But Captain Rodriguez and her crew declined. This wasn't about power or control for them. Humanity had returned to the galaxy not to conquer, but to help others stand on their own. Instead of accepting the mantle of leadership, they advocated for the creation of a galactic federation, a council where every species would have a voice, ensuring that no empire could ever again rise to dominate the galaxy. In the aftermath of the war, the humans didn't disappear back into the shadows. They stayed, helping to rebuild the galaxy they had fought to free. They shared their knowledge, their technology, and most importantly, their belief in cooperation and unity. Planets that had been reduced to ruins under the Xylothians' rule began to thrive once again, with humans working side by side with their former allies. The legend of humanity's return spread far and wide. For generations, they had been nothing more than a myth, a faint hope in the darkest of times. But now, they were real, and their actions had reshaped the galaxy forever. They were a symbol of resilience, of a species that could not only survive the worst the universe had to offer but rise from it stronger than before. The Galactic Federation, born from the ashes of the Xylothian Empire, became a beacon of peace and cooperation, guided by the principles humanity had helped instill. The galaxy, once fractured and oppressed, was united in a way it had never been before. And at the heart of it all was the quiet strength of the humans, who had shown the galaxy that even in the face of impossible odds, victory was possible through resilience, ingenuity, and unity.